Welcome back, everybody, to Tartarian Tales 71, and we are going to push off from Tamerlane, and we are going to go to something that I have never fathomed as part of this whole Tartarian story. I came across this amazing book published in 1978 that is absolutely packed with amazing insight that I don't feel anyone in this community has mentioned or spoken of or talked about personally that I've seen currently. I mean, this was going on in the 70s where this book came out, and so people were kind of diving around back then. I also came across like a romance novel called The Tartar and so much more. So this author, Gabriel Ronay, wrote this book called The Tartar Khan's Englishman. And so this is a crazy story here with tons of bibliographical proof backing it up. 35 previews on the archive.com. So this is a very lightly viewed thing here, very lightly viewed collection, and the chapters are phenomenal. I had a very tough time coming up with the ones that would be perfect, like the 2 chapters that I would read while trying to give a good explanation without just saying, go read this book. Because, oh my god, it is awesome. And just everything, the evidence he has, the perspective he has, and the interesting things that are brought about are just phenomenal. And it's a part of history that I feel is completely lost. This guy kind of came across it and rehashed it, and then it probably maybe made some literary news for a while, but then probably sunk into oblivion again. And now we're bringing it back because it makes sense, and we're all digging, and it's just really cool. It's not just, you'll see, but the relationship between an Englishman who befriended the Tartars and what happened as a result thereof and surrounding it and everything about it. So I'm going to read the foreword, and then I'm going to read the first full chapter called The Full Confession, and I'll chime in from here and there. It is a great read, absolutely phenomenal. You can just sit back and listen. I want you to chime in the comments, add anything else that you feel is important to this, and we'll just examine it as we go. And there's this chapter I want to read, and then I think 1 or 2 more Tartarian tales will deal with this book too, because there's another chapter that's absolutely essential, and as I keep digging, I'm sure I'll find more. So stay tuned here. This is pretty much the beginning of this book, so it's a good start, and if you want to just go and read it after or read it now, do it. I recommend it. You got to log in and sign up for Archive so that you can borrow the book. It is definitely worth it. So let's tap into this, because there's a lot of Mongol, Genghis Khan, Tartar everywhere, and this is a story I've never heard. I've never heard anyone say it. Stop me if you have, but it connects everything. And so the foreword really explains how the guy came across the subject matter for this book. So I'll read that. I might stop a little bit early and then just go right to the first chapter, but this is pretty necessary too. So he says, "It was by curious chance that I came across the story of the shadowy Englishman who was the Tartar Khan's chief diplomat and intelligence expert in the middle of the 13th century. And if that didn't catch your attention, I don't know what will. Although his brand of diplomacy played a key role in the preparation of the Tartar invasion of Europe, the annals of the Eurasian continent do not even record his name." Not surprising. Strange as it may seem, Dracula helped me to pluck him from obscurity. After the publication of my last book, The Dracula Myth, I received a great many letters from readers wanting to impart their views and comments. One of them, written by Scabolax de Vigée, a noted Paris medievalist, asserted that the Vlad the Impaler of Wallachia, the historical Dracula, was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. Interesting. The prospect of a genealogical link between the bloodthirsty Tartar world conqueror and the Balkan prototype of Dracula led me to do some desultory research into the 1241 Tartar onslaught on Europe and its legacy in the eastern half of the continent. Soon, however, I found myself digging deeper into contemporary documents, and then the unexpected happened. In the annals of Matthew Paris, the learned St. Albans chronicler of 13th century events, I chanced on a report dated 1243, i240, on the capture of the Tartar Khan's chief diplomat, together with a group of Tartar officers participating in the siege of Wiener Neustadt in Austria. The Khan's envoy was a native of England, quote unquote. This astonishing piece of information, based on a solid eyewitness account in the best journalistic tradition, made me forget all about Dracula's genealogy and want to find out more about this mysterious Englishman. His actions have left their stamp on the face of Europe, and their effects are still with us today. But our collective memory is notoriously short, and this Englishman, superseded by diplomats of greater perfidy and by greater holocausts, has fallen through the sieve of history. There were many questions about the Khan's English envoy that needed answering. What made him, a Christian, go over to the brood of Antichrist, battering their way into the heart of Europe? How was he spotted by the talent scouts of Tartar intelligence? How did he get to the court of the Khan of Khans in the steppes of Mongolia, well over half a century before the epic journey of Marco Polo? And why is he not listed, like the Venetian, among the great European explorers? How did he rise so high in the employ of the Tartars, and given his role in the invasion of Europe, why is his name unknown to the historians of the continent? And most importantly, why was he so intent on hiding behind the cover of his protecting anonymity? That's the riddle of the Tartars Englishmen had preoccupied early historians, is shown by Purchas's decision to include in his Pilgrim's book the confession of an Englishman who had lived among the Tartars and was drawn along perforce with them in their expedition against Hungary. But after the Elizabethans, no one seems to have shown any interest in, or indeed known anything about, the Tartars Englishmen. The shaft of light from the candle of the St. Albans monk has helped to bring to life the Englishman, as he was known to his contemporaries 7.5 centuries later, by giving me a starting point for the quest to uncover his identity and piece together his extraordinary career. The freshly turned up documents with their nuggets of information about his painful peregrinations and amazing adventures make fascinating reading, even in the cumbrous medieval script, and a critical reconstruction of his life and times of this scholarly English adventurer make up this book. He was seen by his contemporaries as a callous representative of the awesome Tartar power. My impression is that he was more of a victim of circumstance than a conscious shaper of history. His actions, stripped of the motive force of free will, offer a sobering sight of a remarkable individual caught up in the blind forces of destiny. In following in the footsteps of the Tartar Khan's Englishmen across continents and civilizations, I hope I have rescued a part of our common heritage from oblivion. And that is awesome. And I am honored to have found this book and bringing it back. And maybe a lot of people know about it, but I don't think they do. And this is a story that, again, has been erased by the controllers of history. So let's bring it back. And a good way to do that, this writer, I love him. His first title of his first chapter is called A Full Confession. So here we go. The year of grace, 1241, i240s, was not a good year for Europe. Western Christendom was divided, the kings of England and France engrossed in their interminable squabbles, and Pope Gregory and the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II were locked in a bloody and shaming war to decide by the sword the spiritual leadership of our continent. Christendom, having tired of the Crusades, was rapidly losing interest in rolling back conquering Islam from the Holy Land. With its religious fervor now mainly directed against its own heretics, like the Albigenses and Waldenses, Western Christendom was content to contain rather than confront the Arabs, who were still fired by a survey of aggressive zeal. The portents for the year, as every single chronicler worth his salt earnestly recorded, were bad indeed. An eclipse of the sun was taken as an omen of wholesale calamities, and several learned monks construed the blood-red color of the sun as a heavenly sign that Christendom would be drowned in a sea of blood before the year was out. So that's interesting, the blood-red color of the sun, whereas nowadays we see it as a white a lot of the time, which is kind of interesting. I wonder how that's changed, or if they're just talking about the sunset sun, but I doubt it, because I think they would know that. Others feared worse. The cleric Thomas of Spalatao, writing in his Adriatic city port, gave a most graphic account of the superstitious terrors that seized his fellow Europeans. There has been a most wondrous and awful eclipse of the sun. The day became murky and the air filled with darkness, and in the sky there appeared all the stars as if it were night, and a biggish star shone brightly west of the sun. Everyone was seized by such terror that people were running hither and thither as if demented, thinking that the end of the world was nigh. Although it was seen throughout Europe, it is said that in Asia and Africa there was no eclipse of the sun. The same year a comet appeared in the north and seemed to be suspended for several days just above the kingdom of Hungary, and it was being taken for a portent of great and wondrous events. It's things like that, honestly, that make me be like, wow, we're in a world where so much magic is happening around us, probably outside of our realm, that nobody at any time period really knows. Like, these could be anything. Stopping above Hungary, the eclipse, like, in a different way. Only, like, I know eclipses happen and everything like that, but I am still under the impression that there's some kind of amazingly technological race beyond our realm that's controlling a lot of things that we take for granted as being natural or etc. But here we go. Let's keep going. Who knows? I don't, but I'm just theorizing. The events betokened by these and other heavenly signs eventually surpassed the worst expectations and have become deeply etched in the collective memory of Europe. Admittedly, it was not so difficult for these chroniclers to predict great calamities for 1241, having learnt from one eyewitness that the eastern half of the continent was already in ruins, and its population put to the sword or enslaved by terrifying horsemen from Asia. Matthew Paris, the well-informed monk of St. Albans, had already recorded in his annals for the previous year that the detestable people of Satan, to wit, and infinite numbers of Tartars, break forth from their mountain-compassed home, and piercing the solid rocks of the Caucasus, poured forth like devils loosed out of hell, or the Tartarus, so that they are rightly called Tartari, or Tartarians, swarming like locusts over the face of the earth. They have brought terrible devastation to the eastern confines of Europe, laying it waste with fire and sword. Which, again, it almost sounds like they're coming from the hollow earth. And you know how much of this is like myth and like, oh my god, you know, these people are coming to kill us, so they're obviously evil. But you don't know their side. As with every war, every battle, there are two sides. And when only one gets told, it tends to alter the course of history. So this is, again, keep everything in mind. All the same, the princes and kings of Europe feigned surprise and, in their ignorance, preferred to equate the threat from Genghis Khan's empire, which then stretched from the China Sea to the Dniester, with the periodic incursions of marauding bands of nomadic horsemen easily dealt with by the armored knights of Christendom. There was also the hope that, satiated by the rich spoils from the lands of the Russian princes, the Tartars, or as they should correctly be called, the Mongols, would, if ignored, go back from where they came. In the meantime, the Tartar threat, like similar deadly threats to the very existence of Europe in the ensuing centuries, was seized upon by the warring factions of Europe and exploited to serve their petty ends. Was that surprising? Pope Gregory's side began to spread the rumor that the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick, that well-known friend and supporter of Arabs, Jews, and heretics, had actually called in the Tartars, and that the so-called Tartar threat was nothing more than a shabby stratagem to unite Christendom against the Lord Pope. Jesus. The manipulation of information by people in power is just an unending poison upon the earth. Others preferred to get on with their domestic squabbles and local wars, seeing even a certain advantage in the Tartar devastations. When a deputation of Ismailites and Eastern Rite Christians from the Levant came to the court of King Henry III of England to seek help against the Tartars, Peter, Bishop of Winchester, warned the king against aiding them. Let those dogs devour each other and be utterly wiped out, and we shall see then, founded on the ruins, the universal Catholic Church, and there shall truly be one shepherd and one flock. Interesting how they used that for their own means. And we know a lot of what's happened in the meantime, so again, keep all that in mind. But in the spring of that fateful year, when the Mongols suddenly appeared in the very center of Europe, butchering in their millions the Catholic faithful, not Eastern dogs of Hungary, Bohemia, Silesia, and Poland, some of the Western rulers began to see the immensity of the danger threatening the continent. A few even realized that unless they could unite Christendom against the Mongols, they, their crusades, petty wars, and the interminable bickering between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor would be swept away in the sea of blood spilt by the invading Asiatic horsemen. The Landgrave of Thuringia addressed the following urgent call to arms to the Duke of Boulogne and his English vassals. Hear, ye islands, and all ye people of Christianity who profess our Lord's cross, howl in ashes and sackcloth, in fasting and tears and mourning. Let your tears flow in streams. For the day of the Lord is come, is just come, that great and bitter day. An unheard of persecution of the cross of Christ has come from the north and from the sea, and it is with trouble of mind and affliction of heart, with a fearful look and groaning of the spirit, and taking breath every now and then, that I endeavor to tell you the tale as well as I am able. That's kind of interesting. From the north and from the sea. Sounds kind of like from beyond the realm or above the pole. So, how innumerable nations, hateful to the other men and of unbounded wickedness, treading the earth in disdain, from the east even to the frontiers of our dominion, have utterly destroyed the whole earth. They have destroyed cities, castles, and even market towns, and spared neither Christians, pagans, nor Jews, putting to death all alike without mercy. They do not eat men, they devour them. But to sum up all in a few words, the Tartars aforesaid have wholly destroyed all Russia and Poland as far as the confines of the kingdom of Bohemia in the middle part of Hungary, and have suddenly entered the cities and hanged their chiefs in the midst of them. We propose to dwell in the heavenly kingdom to seize arms and grasp the shield, for we would rather die in war than see the evils destroy our nation. And if our shield shall be broken under the first discharge of javelins, when our house is on fire and our land devastated, the neighboring houses and neighboring provinces will be alarmed. Farewell." So very interesting. And again, the Tartars could be evil people leashed from the underworld. This Christian view could be right, or it could be completely wrong. So take everything as it is. I keep saying that, but it really is important because I personally don't know. I don't want to give anyone the wrong opinion. And what we read can be read a couple different ways, because every one-sided story, especially when dealing with a side that hates the other side, you can tend to lose the truth, the overall ultimate truth of anything. And who the good guy is becomes kind of blurred. But here we go. As the Mongol horsemen battered their way westward, the alarm bells began to ring throughout Christendom. Emperor Frederick wrote to the kings of England and France, urging them to arm themselves and prepare for a holy war. The Pope, too, eventually realized that the Tartars were not exactly the figment of his adversary's imagination, and as Batu Khan's troops built hecatombs from the bodies of slain Europeans, he called for a crusade and sent preachers to carry the cross. But his call fell on deaf ears, and the crusade never materialized. The Holy See, still regarding Islam as Christendom's sole enemy, sent some financial aid to the hard-pressed king of Hungary to keep up the fight against the Mongols, while simultaneously it embarked on a policy of appeasement to win over the shamanist, and therefore, from the religious point of view, uncommitted Tartars to his great design, to destroy Arab power and recover the Holy Land. This is some broad stuff happening back in the day, when they just got around by a little horse and buggy. I don't think so. These people are traveling vast distances in interesting ways and speeds. There was some kind of communication method that we maybe don't know about. It was put about that while Europe burned, the Pope preferred to fight the Tartars with spiritual weapons and convert them to Christianity. The Tartars, oblivious of the schemes and stratagems of Europe, proceeded with their plan to conquer the world. In a dispatch to his suzerain, which survived in the secret of history of the Mongols, written in 1242, Batu Khan reported, "Through the power of the eternal heaven and the blessing of the imperial kin, we have made the people of Russia our slaves. 11 other states have been forced into our yoke, and the golden bit has been placed into their mouths." Our trembling continent suddenly saw the Tartar hordes as the sword of the Lord's anger for the sins of the Christian people. In Batu Khan, their prince, who was leading the drive to the Atlantic, was spoken of as the punishing rod of God and likened to Attila the Hun. As the year drew to its close, the extent of the Tartar holocaust became clear. Fear, panic, and confusion spread across the continent as reports of the Tartars' unheard-of cruelty and their cold-blooded destruction of innocent millions were being passed from community to community, monastery to monastery, king to king. Philip Muscat van Dormick, a Flemish chronicler, wrote, "The powerful and strong Tartars have fought against Austria and against Hungary terribly, and the Tartars, God's enemy, God's adversaries, moved against the great land of Russia and wanted to destroy Austria." In the new year, the gateway to Western Europe lay wide open. The Tartars having crossed to Austria on the ice of the frozen Danube, soon they were probing the defenses of the well-fortified town of Wiener Neustadt. A heretic French priest called Ivo de Narbonne, who was taking refuge in the Austrian town from the attentions of the papal inquisitor, recorded in a letter to his bishop, Mgr Mailmort of Bordeaux, the town's siege and the subsequent remarkable events. This present summer, the foresaid nation, being called Tartars, departing out of Hungary, which they had surprised by treason, laid siege unto the very same town, wherein I myself abode, with many thousands of soldiers. Neither were there in the said town on our part above 50 men of war, whom, together with 20 crossbows, the captain had left in garrison. All these out of certain high places, beholding the enemy's vast army, and abhorring the beastly cruelty of Antichrist, his accomplices, signified forthwith unto their governor the hideous lamentations of his Christian subjects, who suddenly being surprised in all the provinces adjoining, without any difference or respect or condition, fortune, sex, or age, were by manifold cruelties all of them destroyed, with whose carcasses the Tartarian chieftains and their brutish and savage followers, glutting themselves as with delicious cakes, left nothing for vultures but the bare bones, and a strange thing it is to consider that the greedy and ravenous vultures disdained to prey upon any of the relics which remained. Old and deformed women they gave, as it were, for daily sustenance unto their dog-headed cannibals. The beautiful devoured they not, but smothered them, lamenting and scritching, with forced and unnatural ravishment. Like barbarous miscreants, they deflowered virgins until they died of exhaustion, and cutting off their tender paps to present for dainties unto their chiefs, they engorged themselves with their bodies. So that, sounds terrible. that's a pretty savage thing. And it almost seems like they mentioned the dog-headed people, which a lot of other videos are talking about, and there's a lot of pictures from history. And who knows, there could have been genetic experience in the past before this that created these. There could have been just a different race of all different kind of beings and anthropomorphic civilizations all over the place, coming from wherever, coming from all these things. We have all the possibilities almost need to stay open, because there's so much contradicting evidence all over the place of things that, we find nowadays to be impossible, but there's mention of them in the past. And so, take what you will, this stuff is loaded. As suddenly as they came, the Tartars evacuated Central Europe, and the heretic French priest lived to tell his tale. Their withdrawal was due to the death of the great Khan Ogadai in Mongolia, and the ensuing problems of succession, rather than the armed might of a handful of West European princelings, as the monastic chroniclers would have us believe. So already you get lies in every perspective. Just immediately you can see perspective shifts from what actually happened to what it is. And again, you're only hearing from one side on all these. You're never really hearing from the Tartars' perspective that much. It's always kind of the ones who consider them evil, and who's backing each side. And again, are the Pope and the people in charge of this, are they summoning these hordes like we've seen in more modern wars, where people will be like, oh, we hate these people, but meanwhile they're feeding them weapons and stuff. So you never know. In any event, the emboldened Christian forces captured 8 Tartar officers near Wiener Neustadt. One of them was recognized by Prince Frederick the Warlike of Austria and identified as an Englishman. It was an astonishing and staggering discovery, bordering on the unbelievable. Englishmen from the westernmost fringes of Europe were about as likely to be found riding into the heart of our continent with the Asiatic whores as moon men. It was not, I wonder if they know what moon men is. It was not just that this Englishman came, as it were, from the wrong direction. He was in the most unlikely company. England was a devoutly Christian country and the mainstay of the Holy Roman Church in the time of Henry III. Furthermore, Englishmen were, in the minds of most Europeans, more readily associated with fair service to church, king, and country than the cold-blooded destruction of innocent millions. Yet there he was, this native of England, not just dressed like the rest of the bloodthirsty horsemen, but one of them. Prince Frederick's father, Leopold, who was one of the prime movers and central figures of the Fifth Crusade, knew him from the Holy Land some 24 years earlier, but Frederick himself also knew of the Englishman, as he became known to those he had negotiated with as the Tartar Khan's envoy, plenipotentiary, personal interpreter, and rumored spy chief in Europe. The Englishman's harsh method of negotiation and his consummate double dealings lent a sinister ring to his appellation. Neither the princes and kings with whom he had negotiated, nor the chancelleries of Europe knew his actual name. To his contemporaries he was simply the Englishman who betrayed Christendom, a war criminal. The first clue as to the identity of this mysterious figure and how he came to aid with his diplomatic skill the alien hordes bent on the annihilation of Europe can be found in his crusader background and presence in the Holy Land around 1218, the time of the Fifth Crusade. Another pointer is that he must have moved in the highest circles of Crusader leadership if his meeting with the Austrian ruler was remembered by the latter's sons after 20-odd years, for princes would hardly have taken much notice of a simple pilgrim. That's true. Although he had every reason to try to protect his anonymity while serving as Batu Khan's all-powerful ambassador, something of his station in England must have been known to the Duke of Austria. Unfortunately, the heretic French priest omitted to record it for posterity. But he found him interesting enough to devote a whole letter to him, and thus Father Ivo has helped to bring the Englishman to life again over 7 centuries later. Father Ivo included certain facts related by the Englishman in his letter, while omitting others, seems to be due to his determination to use the Englishman's case to resume communications with his old bishop and to show that he had purged himself of his heresies. In an impassioned plea, he urged Bishop Mailmort to persuade the kings of France, England, and Spain, between whom you hold a middle place by every means in your power, to lay aside all their private quarrels forever, or at least for a time, and hold wise and speedy counsel among themselves, how they may be able safely to encounter so many thousands of such savages. For I call to witness the faith of Christ, in which I hope to be saved, that if all are united, they would crush those Tartar monsters, or singly will be crushed by them. The information included in Father Ivo's letter, incomplete, distorted, and in part even contradictory, has nevertheless provided a starting point in the quest to piece together the jigsaw of the Englishman's extraordinary career. After many dead ends and red herring leads in the archives of a dozen European and Asian nations, sufficient original contemporary material could be found to identify the irresistible forces behind his adventures and establish the circumstances that enabled him to bridge the gap between the army of God and the Mongol hordes and to serve them both. These new facts, coupled with the sobering sight of a remarkable individual caught up in the blind forces of destiny, now assure the Englishman a fairer hearing than he received at Wiener Neustadt at 1242. Whew! The Englishman must have realized that his luck had run out at that Austrian town and that his life was not worth a beggar's farthing, as even a full confession could only save a miscreant's soul, not his life, in war-torn 13th century Europe. In making a full confession, supported by such oaths and protestations as the devil himself would have been trusted for, the Englishman must have hoped to achieve something beyond a sporting chance of talking himself out of a very tight spot. Even though the blurred rendering of Father Ivo's tendentious letter, it seems quite clear that what the Englishman was trying to do was to justify his motives and actions in Tartar service and rebut the charges of traitor to Christendom. Although he must have been eager and willing to talk, he was, in accordance with the custom of the time, being allured, tortured is a more appropriate word, by princes, to confess the truth about the Tartars, and he without hesitation made his statement. He began his confession, witnessed by Father Ivo, by admitting that he had been perpetually banished from the realm of England in regard of certain notorious crimes by him committed. The Englishman further reported of himself that presently after the time of his banishment, namely when he was about 30 years of age, he went to the city of Acre in the Holy Land. The nature of the certain notorious crimes by him committed was either too complicated or more likely seemingly irrelevant to the charges facing the Englishman at Wiener Neustadt for Father Ivo to bother writing it down. But since perpetual banishment was a favored method of the kings of England of ridding themselves of dangerous political offenders or high-ranking rebels whose execution would have created more problems than would it have solved, it is reasonably safe to assume that the Englishman belonged to this category. This is corroborated by the instant and harsh justice meted out to ordinary criminals in 13th century England. But the fact that presently after the time of his banishment he went to the city of Acre in the Holy Land provides an even firmer proof of the political nature of his exile, for his arrival in Acre in 1218 coincided with that of the English contingent of the Fifth Crusade. A detailed and careful checking of the list of English Crusader pilgrims reveals in their ranks several leaders of the baronial faction which had fought King John and after his death his infant son Henry for a charter of rights, the Magna Carta, and had been excommunicated or perpetually banished after the crushing of the rebellion in 1217. The only way out for the highest-ranking outlaws and political clerics excommunicated by an implacable papal legate in Henry's camp was a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which held the promise of a fresh start in the lifting of excommunication, and this would fully explain the Englishman's presence in Acre in 1218. After relating a curious incident in the city of Acre and his subsequent expulsion from the ranks of the Crusaders, the doubly banished Englishman spoke volubly of his tribulations in the neighboring Middle Eastern countries. His saving grace, it appears, was his extraordinary gift for languages. Even Father Ivo admitted, however grudgingly, that the Englishman was somewhat acquainted with letters, a rare attribute among the roistering barons of England. Father Ivo quoted the Englishman as stating that in Chaldea he began to commend to writing these words, which he heard spoken, and within a short space of time, so aptly to pronounce and utter them himself, that he was reputed for a native of that country, and by the same dexterity he attained to many languages. As it transpires from the Englishman's confession, this gift for mastering foreign tongues and speaking them like a native attracted the attention of Tartar spies gathering intelligence on the weaknesses and rivalries of Christendom. The Tartar agents appeared to have been on the lookout for well-educated people that their nomadic civilization could not produce. The Englishman, with his flair for languages and knowledge of the political intricacies of Western Europe, would have been just the sort of person that Tartar Khan's chancellery needed most. The Tartars, having intelligence of him by their spies, drew him perforce into their society. They allured him by many rewards to their faithful service, by reason that they wanted interpreters, recalled Father Ivo. This new phase in the bizarre life of the Englishman was justified to his interrogators with the claim that the Tartars drew him perforce into their society, and having had little choice, he served them faithfully, due in no small part to the many rewards of his new masters. His dramatic break with Christendom resulted in a long and arduous journey to Karakorum, the seat of Mongol power, where no European had been before. He preceded Marco Polo by over half a century, yet the account of the Venetian's travels to the court of the Great Khan alone has assured him a fine place in Europe's Hall of Fame, while the Englishman has been completely forgotten. Wonder why? During his interrogation, he must have been told not to waste time on irrelevant details of his journey, or possibly Father Ivo could see no advantage in including them in his letter. After all, the heretic French peace was concerned with weightier issues. Furthermore, at a time when crusaders apart, most Europeans hardly ventured beyond the confines of their parishes, there was not much interest in travels literally beyond the ends of the world. So it was left to his present inquiry to follow in the Englishman's footsteps, and on the strength of freshly unearthed documentary evidence, filling the missing details. Father Ivo's account of the confession contains a vital pointer to the Englishman's rapid rise in Mongol service and the devastating use he made of his power during his diplomatic missions nearly 2 decades later. This fellow, on the behalf of the most tyrannical king of the Tartars, had been twice, as an envoy and interpreter with the king of Hungary, menacing and plainly foretelling those mischiefs which happened afterwards, unless the king would submit himself in his kingdom unto the Tartar yoke. Extant contemporary documents confirm that between 1238 and 1240, King Bela IV of Hungary had repeatedly been visited by a Tartar ambassador who had threatened and cajoled him, demanding his unconditional surrender. Bela, the proud ruler of a then powerful Christian kingdom, imbued with a strong proselytizing zeal, simply ignored the communications of the heathen Tartars and lived to regret it. But more significantly, the Englishman admitted in his confession to have headed those embassies. Apart from the surprising intelligence that he also spoke Hungarian, this reveals more about his position in Tartar service than the rest of his confession put together. Wow, this guy does a lot of research, and this is just chapter 1. It shows that the Englishman was not a mere interpreter, as he had started off at the time of his recruitment, but a fully fledged envoy plenipotentiary. An examination of the names of 60 Mongol ambassadors who represented the will of the Khans in Eastern Europe between the middle of the 13th and 14th centuries reveals that this post was reserved, with only 2 exceptions, for Mongols and other ethnic Central Asians, emphasizing the honor and trust bestowed on the Englishman by Batu Khan. Who then was this mysterious Englishman who lived by his wits in an alien world, managed to overcome with surprising ease great adversities, and used his position so callously to deceive and destroy dozens of unwary nations? For as he himself admitted of the Tartar negotiating ploys, by these fictions they, the Mongols, prevailed upon some simple kings to make a treaty with them, and those princes perished all the same. To identify him and unmask his self-imposed incognito after 736 years of protecting anonymity, it was necessary to look more closely into the causes and circumstances of his banishment from England. A critical look at the Barons' fight against King John's despotic rule has helped to place in the right social and political context the Englishman's crime, and by delving into the original materials amassed by chroniclers who all lived when the king reigned, and wrote for that time what they saw or heard credibly reported, as one of them put it, it became possible to retrace his steps and establish the truth about the Englishman. So, wow, this leads to a whole nother aspect of history that I've never really conceived of before. Just kind of, you always hear about different kind of tactics and different things in the Asiatic wars, but you don't hear about spies like this or different things, leading to the thing. And what would lead, what would cause someone to leave the English, the beloved English, the saints of England, to go with these devilish hordes? And and is that the reality? How did they treat him? What did he know? What was he able to know about the history of these people, where they came from, their origins? All the knowledge that we seek today would have been known to this guy back then, because in the 1200s the history was fresh. All that stuff that soon got destroyed or had been destroyed, was probably collected and taken, and people were probably written down, documented in rapid ways. We see how easy it is to communicate during this time, and how they're building things, they're destroying things, they're doing so much during this time. And I have a feeling that our world, they blame all the devastation on the Tartars. The Tartars probably blame it on them. It just goes back and forth. But either way, the world got devastated. I mean, they talk about, there's all these different facts about different stories about tens of thousands of churches and hundreds of thousands of holy sites and buildings and ancient relics being just destroyed in all these cities. And what we see today is just such a small fraction, such a tiny hint that it's almost insulting. But at least we do get that hint, because it shows us. It's just enough to make us think and wonder what those old other buildings were like. If some of the new buildings are as intense as they are now, then what were these old ones, and what are the true origins? Who was building them? What was here? The underworld, the hollow earth. Did these people come from Tartarus or underworld? What did the Christendom think of the underworld? The symbolism associated in differentiating between reality and myth. Like, what are the truths between all of this? There's just so much going on, and it's interesting to put it's almost like putting ourselves in the realm of this Tartar, and a lot of people probably would, if in that situation, do this when given the chance for power, and maybe he preferred that side. Who knows what is going on, what happened, and whatever. But we are going to dive deeper into this book, because it's awesome and there's more to come. So stay tuned. Thank you all for this one. Share it, spread it, do whatever you want, and enjoy. Check out the book, though, definitely. And leave your comments below. Bless you all.